Welcome back to the Female Property Expert Podcast. I'm Emma Morby, and today we're going to dive into a strategy that's not only popular, but it can also be incredibly profitable if it's done right. This is investing in HMOs, or houses of multiple occupation. For those of you who are new to HMOs, this strategy involves renting out individual rooms within a single property to different tenants. This is typically sharing communal spaces like kitchens and bathrooms. But a lot of HMOs now have their own integrated en-suites. The beauty of HMOs lies in their potential for much higher yields compared to your traditional single lets. But they also come with their own unique set of challenges and legal requirements that you need to be aware of. So in this episode, I'm going to guide you through the essentials of HMO investing, covering everything from licensing and property selection to management tips and strategies for maximizing your income. I'll also share the risks involved, as well as some practical tips to help you decide if HMOs are the right thing for you and your portfolio. So if you're ready to learn more about this high yielding strategy and whether it's a good fit, let's get started. So what exactly is an HMO and why choose this strategy? I get asked this quite a lot. Let's begin by defining what an HMO is. So in the UK, this is an HMO, or a house of multiple occupation, is a property rented by at least 3 tenants who are not part of the same household, meaning they're all from separate families. They share facilities such as kitchens and bathrooms, and it's making it similar to a shared house setup as such. The main appeal of HMOs for investors is their ability to generate high rental income compared to single tenancy buy-to-lets, for instance. Think of it this way. If you own a 3-bedroom house as a standard buy-to-let, you might be likely to rent it to a single family or perhaps a couple for a fixed amount per month. But with an HMO, you could rent out each room separately to different tenants, which will increase your overall income. Let me give you an example. Let's say, and this is an example of one of our students. Let's say you got your 4-bedroom property in Manchester, which she has. If rented as a single family home, then you'd be looking at probably around £1,200 a month in rent. But after it had been converted into an HMO and renting each room individually at £450 per month, it brought in £1,800 a month. So that's an additional £600 income, which is quite a difference on rent. So from that point of view, it was a much better solution for that particular property in that particular area. And also she wanted to diversify her portfolio, and this was a way of doing it. However, and I caveat this, while HMOs can be highly profitable, they do require much more hands-on management, as obviously you're dealing with multiple tenants. Potential turnover, specific legal requirements mean that you have, when I say potential turnover, I mean of tenants, and of specific legal requirements, you have more of them than you would do in a single buy-to-let, for instance. So before jumping in thinking, yeah, great, this is the strategy for me, it's crucial to weigh both the pros and cons and look at where you're heading. What are your goals? Do they align with your goals? I now want to talk about one of the most important aspects of investing in HMOs, and that's the legal side. Okay, so licensing and legal requirements. In the UK, HMOs are heavily regulated, and this is for good reason, if I'm honest. I have seen, when we owned a national inventory company, I had seen some shocking HMOs before they changed all the legislation, people living in squalor, and it was disgusting. So I support the heavily regulated side of it because people have a right to live in good quality, safe housing. So having multiple tenants in a single property obviously raises safety concerns. So sort of strict standards are put in place to protect them and you. One of those things are mandatory HMO licensing. So in most areas, if your property is rented to 3 or more people forming more than one household, i.e. they're from different families, and they're sharing amenities, then i.e. kitchen, you'll need an HMO license from your local council. Now, this is mandatory. It's not optional. And if you're operating without one, you risk hefty fines and obviously being stopped for renting the property out full stop. It is pretty easy to go to your local housing officer and say to them, I'm looking at changing this property into an HMO. What would I need to do? And how does the licensing work? They are happy to share that information. They may even offer to come out and do a visit of the property, recommending certain things that you're going to need to carry out. Then, depending on where you are, you're going to have additional licensing. So some councils require a license for even smaller HMOs. This is known as additional licensing, and it varies by location. So certain parts of Oxford have this, and also London. So they've adopted this additional licensing for properties because a number of houses were being rented out and through a loophole, basically, and that loophole needed to be closed for tenant safety. This can be as low as 3 or more tenants. Now, I know an HMO, a mandatory HMO license can be for 5 or more, but they lowered that recently to 3 or more. And now additional licensing on top falls in certain areas. So where an Article 4 is, which means they will not give you an HMO license, people are then, in theory, they were then renting to 3 or less and skirting around those rules. And then the additional licensing scheme came in to protect that. Hopefully I've explained that properly. If you're confused, drop me a message and I can go through it in more detail. Now, what I would say is it's crucial to check with your local authority, because although there may not be any Article 4 HMO restrictions in that area, there could be additional licensing restrictions. And then you have HMO management regulations. So licensing isn't the only legal responsibility you'll have. So HMOs must comply with specific health and safety requirements. This includes regular fire safety checks, proper ventilation, secure locking systems for each door. You'll need an annual gas safety certificate. You'll need an electrical installation condition report, normally every 5 years. Some licensing requires it every 3 years. So all of these things you need to look for and have installed already to be able to secure that license. So for landlords who are new to the HMO world, the compliance side can feel overwhelming, quite frankly, but there are various resources out there. If you've done our training program, you'll know that we provide those, but also, and also if you want to do our training program, please feel free to come across to us at support@thefemalepropertyexpert.co.uk and we can point you in the right direction. But you can also get that information from your local council. Is a good starting point. And they often have online guidelines specific to that particular area, which will be helpful if you're operating in an area that isn't on your own doorstep. There are websites like NALA, which is the National Residential Landlords Association, and they can sort of give you, you have to be a member, unfortunately, of those. So they won't give you it for free, but you can find out some information around HMOs. So there's various different ways in which you can approach it if it's a strategy that you're looking to do. So next I want to talk about selecting the right property for an HMO. So it is quite important because you need to be able to maximize your money. So choosing the right property is one of the most, I suppose, critical factors in the HMO success process. Not every property will work well as an HMO. Even if it looks good, it might not work well. And a poor choice will have serious repercussions on the profitability of that property. So location, I bang on about this in all of my podcasts. Location matters for an HMO massively. It's crucial for an HMO investment. So ideal areas are often near universities or hospitals, city centres, employment zones. This is where there's a demand for affordable shared housing. For example, university towns like Nottingham, Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, they all have high demand for student accommodation. Properties near major employment centres, we see these in Oxford, Reading, mainly southeast, I suppose, is where I've been looking for mine. They have good links to transport. They also attract young professionals, which makes it ideal for HMOs. People coming into the area but can't afford to rent an actual 1-bedroom flat because it's £1,800 will quite happily rent a room in a smart house, giving them access to other people so they can talk to their fellow neighbours as such from their room, but also it gives them the safety of knowing that they're in a house and that there are other people around them. A lot of people like to live with other people. They don't like to live on their own, strangely enough. They like the companionship when they come home and they chat to somebody about their day's work. They like that. Then we've got layout and space. The layout of the property is another very big key factor. Ideally, you'll want a property with generously sized bedrooms. Now, most local authorities have fixed room sizes. You'll need to go and find out what they are. They also need enough space to create good communal areas. In some cases, you might need to reconfigure rooms to maximize the rental space itself. This would be like when you're like converting a dining room into an extra bedroom, for instance, but you still got your lounge and your kitchen. Keep in mind that the more rooms you can safely add, the higher your income will be. But you'll also need to ensure that each room meets this minimum size requirement. And as I said, it does vary by council. You'll also need to be aware that the higher up in the amount of rooms you have will depend on whether you have to get planning permission or not. Because if you go into a larger HMO, planning permission will be required. And then the other thing to consider is potential renovations. So some of the most profitable HMOs are properties that have been sort of renovated or converted. As an example, if you find a large rundown house at a good price, you could potentially add value by converting it into like a 6-bedroom HMO. Just remember that conversions can be costly. So you're going to need to calculate the costs of the costs and the potential return or potential rental income. A good rule of thumb is that your total rental income should cover your expenses and still leave you with a healthy profit margin. Next, I'm going to look at maximizing income and managing tenants. So let's talk about that. Once your HMO is up and it's running, it's about maximizing your rental income and managing that property effectively. So setting rent levels, research the local market to determine sort of competitive rent for each room. You might offer different rates for each room based on size or additional features. As an example, if it's a 1-bedroom with an ensuite, you could charge a premium. Websites like Spare Room and Rightmove are great resources for understanding current room rates in your actual area. So go on those and use them. Have a look, do some research. Then we'll have tenant management. So this is where managing an HMO involves dealing with multiple tenants and sometimes multiple different personalities, and they clash. So it's worth conducting kind of a thorough tenant screening, as obviously stable, respectful tenants can save you countless headaches, let's say. I'm trying to put this as tactfully as I can. But basically, if you put students in with somebody who is a professional and they're 45, normally that doesn't mix. So you need to pick whether you're going to be a student let or whether you're going to be a corporate let, and whether you're going to be a co-living let. What does that look like? Is it going to be all female? You need to try and look at what you actually want to achieve. I'd also actually, adding to that, consider setting clear house rules from the start. This minimizes conflict. I mean, it never rules it out, but it does minimize it. And it ensures everyone understands their responsibility in those shared spaces at all times. Then you're going to face void periods. So one common issue with HMOs is room vacancies, known as void periods in the industry. So even if one room is vacant, you're still responsible for basically the entire mortgage and all the expenses. So minimizing void periods is quite key to keeping profitable. So try to have waiting lists of potential tenants and plan viewings early when you know that someone's going to be moving out. You'll also have maintenance and utilities. So with more tenants in a single property, wear and tear is going to be inevitable and it's going to be higher. So a good property management strategy is to factor maintenance and utility costs into the rent. Some landlords include utilities in the rent, while others charge separately. We used to charge all inclusive, so the room rate included the utilities. And if I'm honest, including utilities is more attractive to a tenant, but you're going to have to be careful when budgeting on your part to make sure that you are definitely getting the right amount of money. Otherwise, you're going to be spending it out of your profit margin. So consider investing in potentially a property management company if you prefer a hands-off approach, because they're going to handle the tenant communication, any maintenance, they're going to collect the rent. But you have to accept that this is going to incur additional costs. And although it can relieve a lot of pressure from you, especially if you're running a larger HMO, it is a service you're going to have to pay for. And finally, I want to talk to you about understanding the risks. So, like any investment, HMOs come with risks, and it's essential to understand these before diving headfirst into this. First, high turnover and management intensity. So, managing an HMO can be more hands-on than a traditional rental property, as we've discussed, and this is due to the tenant turnover and the shared spaces. The higher turnover means you're likely to be searching for new tenants more frequently, which requires time and effort, or hiring a property manager or going to a property management company so they can advertise for you. There's also a lot of legal compliance. So we spoke about licensing and compliance requirements. They can be stringent, and failure to meet them could lead to fines and legal action. So HMO licensing is not something you can skip. A lot of people think, oh, well, I've got my license now and I've got it for 3 years or 5 years or however long it will be. And they kind of relax a bit, but you need to be more on the ball. You need to be aware that there is certain things you have to do every year or every 6 months that meets your licensing requirements. It keeps your license in place. And these are safety aspects. You also need to make sure that you budget for these costs as well, for like any inspections that are going on or certification that's going to be required. Budget for it as you go through. Then we've got the property wear and tear. I've discussed this as well. The increased occupancy and use of the property will lead to much more wear and tear much faster than what a single family let would be. So it's essential to have what I call a realistic maintenance budget to cover these costs. We had a lady who'd been on our program and she had a maintenance budget, but the maintenance budget was 2%, and it just wasn't sensible for the size of the HMO. And we suggested she increase to a minimum of 10%, because she was like, oh, well, no, because everything's new and it should be fine. But the reality is you may have to paint every year, maybe even 18 months. Your carpets are going to get more worn. You're going to have more things broken because there's more people using them. And it's all of those things that need consideration. And then vacancies and rental arrears. So for me, in an HMO, the risk of vacancies and rental arrears should be spread across multiple tenants. But if I'm honest, this can still impact your income. So consider setting aside, I don't know, a contingency fund, let's say, to cover periods where rooms are vacant or when tenants fall behind in rent, because this fund itself will help you carry on being profitable without actually hitting your bottom line. The bottom line is that while HMOs can be really profitable, they do require much more active management and, I suppose, ongoing attention to legal requirements. So if you're willing to invest the time and the effort, they can offer pretty good returns, but they're not set it and forget it investment. Okay. You do need to have to work at this. So that's a wrap for today's episode on HMOs. Thank you for tuning in again to the Female Property Expert podcast. I hope you now have a clearer understanding of what it takes to succeed with HMO investments, including, I suppose, how to pick the right property, handle tenant management, and navigate that legal side. Remember, HMOs can be a great way to boost your rental income. I'm not putting a negative spin on this, but they do require careful planning and active management. So if you're interested in learning more about HMOs, or you want to join a community of like-minded investors, feel free to visit our website, thefemalepropertyexpert.co.uk. This is where you're going to find some free information. So you've got some resources there that's free, but also if you are looking to learn a little bit more, we have some paid programs you can join. As always, if you found this episode helpful, please rate and review the podcast. It really helps us reach more listeners. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode, where we'll be discussing another exciting investment topic. But until next time, happy investing.